Welcome to This Is How We Heal with naturopath, herbalist, and author Anthea Koulouros. With over 3 decades of clinical experience guiding thousands on their healing journeys, Anthea invites you into honest, heartfelt conversations about what really gets in the way of health and healing and what gently brings us back to ourselves. If you're sick and tired of feeling sick and tired, overwhelmed by wellness noise, or just yearning to feel like yourself again, you're in the right place. This podcast is for anyone feeling burnt out, lost in a sea of symptoms, or simply longing for a deeper connection to their health, their body, and their truth.
Hello and welcome to This Is How We Heal. I'm Anthea Koulouros, naturopath, and someone who has spent a great deal of time sitting with both my patients and myself in these harder corners of life. Wherever you are right now, whether you're walking, resting, driving, cooking, or simply pausing for a breath in your day, I am genuinely glad you're here. This podcast is a space where we can slow things down, where we look at health, healing, and life with curiosity rather than certainty. Today, I want to share something I've been writing about in my book, the book that I've been working on for quite a while. It's not ready yet. It's still very much finding its shape. But this particular section has been sitting with me, asking to be spoken out loud. So today, I am bringing it to you. The section is called Swallowed by Fear, Hindered by the Known and Unknown. And it is, at its heart, about what happens when fear stops being a visitor and becomes the furniture. Let me begin here. Fear is not the enemy, and it never was. Before it became overwhelming, before it shaped our choices, before it took up residence in our chest at 3 a.m, fear was something else entirely. It was a guardian, an ancient biological signal designed to alert the body to danger, mobilize our resources, and move us out of harm's way. Fear belongs to the oldest layers of the nervous system. It did not evolve to make us miserable. It evolved to keep us alive. And here is the paradox I find so quietly profound. The same sensitivity that makes us capable of love, of presence, of genuine aliveness in the world, that same sensitivity makes us vulnerable to what the world can do to us. The capacity for joy is also the capacity for pain. To blunt the fear is to blunt the feeling. To numb the pain is eventually to numb the joy. Fear understood this way is not a flaw in our design. It is evidence of a nervous system that has not yet found enough safety to remain open. The difficulty arises when fear no longer comes and goes as needed, but becomes the backdrop, when the body does not return to rest, when vigilance replaces ease and survival becomes the dominant setting. With repetition, response becomes reflex. What was once situational becomes structural. Like a path walked so often, the grass no longer grows, the body no longer pauses to choose. It simply follows the way it knows. I speak personally here for a moment because I think that's where this gets real. There was a time in my life when fear was not just an occasional visitor, it was the organizing force beneath almost everything. I lived for decades with fear of dark, fear of losing loved ones, fear of being alone, fear of illness, fear of failure, fear of making decisions, and fear of change. Sometimes it arrived dramatically, and other times it came as panic, but mostly it lived quietly, shaping how much I risked, how deeply I trusted, and how freely I moved in the world. This is what happens when fear becomes a way of living. The nervous system does not distinguish between real danger and remembered danger. It responds to both as though they are happening right now. And what I want to say clearly that this is not a weakness, it is simply an adaptation. We are not frightened creatures lacking courage. We are in many cases remarkably well-adapted creatures who learned very early that the world required caution. The cost, though, is real. When fear becomes chronic, the field of possibility narrows. Life becomes about avoiding loss rather than inhabiting it fully. And healing itself, the reason why we're here. The very thing we want can begin to feel threatening because healing asks us to be open. to be vulnerable, to expose the soft, unguarded parts of ourselves. I want to talk about two flavors of fear that I see again and again in my clinic and that I've experienced deeply in myself. The first is fear of the known. This is fear anchored in what we already remember: a diagnosis, a past illness, a treatment that failed, and a moment when the body felt like a stranger. These experiences lodge in the nervous system. The body remembers what the mind recalls. And when familiar sensations arise again, fear arrives instantly. Not because something is wrong right now, but because something once was. It sounds like, this is how it started last time. I know where this leads. The past colonizes the present. Certainty becomes a trap. I have sat opposite countless patients paralyzed not by their symptoms, but by what they have been told those symptoms meant. Fear of the known can be just as immobilizing as anything else. And then there is fear of the unknown, which traps us not in the past, but in the future. What if it gets worse? What if this never ends? What if I made the wrong choice? Here, imagination outruns reality. The mind rehearses loss, and the body prepares for a threat that hasn't arrived yet. Fear begins to masquerade as wisdom, as caution, as being realistic. And there is something to that. Foresight and care are genuinely valuable. But underneath, fear is still asking for control in a world that cannot promise certainty. What both fears share is this: they pull attention away from the small, available opportunities for healing that exist right now. The body tightens, the breath shortens, and the present moment, which is actually the only place where healing can happen, is abandoned. There is a third flavor I want to name because it is often the most hidden: fear of failure, and specifically fear of hope. For some people, hope feels dangerous, not because they don't want to heal, but because they've tried before. They have invested, believed, followed protocols, and still being met with the same disappointment. Over time, the nervous system can learn a brutal logic. Hope raises the stakes. And so fear begins to speak in the language of protection. If I do not hope, I cannot be let down. If I do not try, I cannot fail. This can sound like restraint, like realism, but beneath it, it lives something far more tender: a fear of being responsible for one's own suffering, a fear of being disappointed again by one's own body or one's own efforts. And so from here, avoidance follows. Appointments get postponed, tests get delayed, protocols are followed half-heartedly. Avoidance can feel like relief in the moment because it reduces immediate distress. But the cost comes later because neuroscience has shown us something important. Every time we avoid what triggers fear, the fear grows stronger. Avoidance teaches the nervous system that the thing avoided is genuinely dangerous. And not acting begins to feel safer than acting, even when inaction quietly worsens the very thing we fear. Fear rarely calls this avoidance. It calls it being super careful. It calls it waiting until I'm ready, and it presents itself as protection. I want to tell you a story about someone. I will call her Grace. I cannot give you her real name. Grace has since departed, sadly, but she was a patient of mine that really has stuck with me in my head and heart for a very long time. And the reason I want to give you Grace as an example is because she embodied some of these qualities completely. And so I want you to listen in, and I hope I don't need to grab a tissue when I say this out loud. So Grace, a patient of mine, someone very quite dear to me, was 6 months pregnant when she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. She required an emergency cesarean to give birth to her baby, a healthy, beautiful child. But until that moment, Grace had been as well as could be. She cared deeply for her health, and yet here we were. In my many years as a naturopath, I have sat opposite many patients facing frightening diagnoses. I've always done my best to be the calm, steady presence that they needed. Inside, I was sometimes stricken with fear myself. But for some reason with Grace, something shifted. Sitting with her in the hardest of moments, fear did not arrive, and I was really surprised by this. Instead, there was this deep, grounded peace. I needed to be in that state for her newborn and for myself. The medical trajectory had already been set. Some things were beyond my control, even though I really did try, and so did she. When Grace gave birth to her darling baby and passed away some months later, she did not want to leave her little one, but when the moment came, she knew it was time. I share this story because Grace taught me something I couldn't have learned from a textbook. She showed me what it looks like to move through the most profound fear imaginable and arrive at something on the other side. Not an absence of grief and not the removal of fear, but a kind of spaciousness where love could still be fully felt. So I like to use the word and. She didn't bypass the fear. She felt the fear fully and created enough space where love could still live. And I came to understand that my role in those moments were not only to offer clinical expertise, it was to offer my regulated nervous system, to hold space, to remain in uncertainty, and to allow love to be felt when fear could no longer lead. So where does this leave us? Healing does not require the eradication of fear. Let me say that again because I think it matters. Fear does not need to be eliminated. It needs relationship. It needs context. It needs to be held rather than fought. The psychologist Stephen Porges has a phrase I return to often: safety is the treatment. No part of us relinquishes its protective role in an unsafe environment. Safety must come before change. This is why force fails, why willpower collapses, why just be brave so often backfires. What I've come to call informed courage is quieter than that. It's not the absence of fear. It's the capacity to remain present with fear without handing it the steering wheel. It looks like staying when the urge is to flee, choosing responsiveness over reactivity, and allowing fear to speak, and then gently, firmly taking the lead yourself, your present self with a capital S. Fear doesn't disappear, it just integrates. And when fear is integrated rather than exiled, it becomes what it always was meant to be: a signal, not a ruler, a messenger and not a master. This is not the end of fear. It is the end of fear as the organizing principle of the self. So, before I leave you today, I want to offer a few questions to sit with, not to answer quickly, but to carry with you. What is the specific threat your fear is responding to right now? Is it present? Is it remembered? Or is it imagined? What has fear helped you survive or avoid in the past? And can you offer it some genuine gratitude for that service? When you imagine healing, truly imagine it. Does any part of you feel threatened by the possibility? What might that part be protecting? And finally, what would it mean to remain present with fear rather than trying to make it disappear? Thank you for being here for this one. This episode felt so important to say out loud, and I hope something in it landed for you wherever you are on your health journey. As I mentioned, the book is still finding its shape, but episodes like this are part of how it comes alive. If something resonated with you today, I'd love to hear it. You can find me at apothecabyAnthea.com or my Anthea Cluris social media across various platforms. Your messages genuinely mean something to me. If this episode felt relevant to someone you love, please share it. And if you haven't already, a review or follow-up helps more people find their way right here to me. So until next time, take good care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next episode of This Is How We Heal.
If this episode spoke to you, your healing journey doesn't have to end here. Join Anthea in her dedicated online community, the Staying Healthy Together Club, a space for real conversations and holistic health education with trusted resources. We'd love to see you there.